September 21, 1945. That was the night I died. Seta. War. War never changes, or so it is often said in the Fallout video game series. Unfortunately, in this day and age, where war is often the focus of many works of fiction, from literature, film, comics, and, of course, video games, the more negative effects of war is often glossed over. I mean, sure, in games and works based on Warhammer 40,000, they do show how terrible things can get, but, more often than not, this is almost never elaborated upon, and it is only in rare glimpses in the novelizations that we see the amount of suffering experienced by the civilian population. Indeed, as any war veteran or survivor of war can tell you, combat is a terrible affair and can dehumanize both its victims and its perpetrators. Many have lost their faith in either their religion or humanity itself on the battlefields of the real world, and those who survive are often changed forever by their experiences. One could just take a look at J.R.R. Tolkien, creator of The Lord of the Rings, and see how the things he went through in World War I changed him and his own works thoroughly. Hi, hello, and welcome again everybody to another episode of Natural Juan. This time around, I'm going to discuss to you the animated classic Grave of the Fireflies, a masterpiece created by Studio Ghibli, the same creators behind other great animated works like My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away, that details the story of war orphans in Japan during World War II. However, before all that, I'd like to dedicate this particular video to my colleague Shanine Janil Sho, wherever she is right now. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for notifications to see more content like this. Special shout out too to Mr. Jonathan Green, my patron in Patreon. Now, if you'd also like to support my channel and what I do here, you'll find my Patreon information along with PayPal and Gcash info in the description below. Alright, with all that out of the way, let us look upon the dark face of war and learn about the Grave of the Fireflies. As mentioned, Grave of the Fireflies is an animated classic released on April 16, 1988, created by Studio Ghibli and directed by Isao Takahata. It is based on a short story of the same name by Akiyuki Nosaka, published in October 1967 in Japanese and released in English for a worldwide audience in 1978. The work focuses on two orphans, Seta and Setsuko, whose parents died as a consequence of the events of the Second World War. The film opens with the bombing of Kobe in 1945. Due to the incendiary effects of the weapons used, Seta and Setsuko's mother dies of horrid burns that cover her body. Both siblings are then forced to live with their aunt, whose reaction to the horrific death of their mother is, "How awful," and tells Seta that he should write to his father about it. It's not made clear whether the two children and the aunt know, but it is very likely that the siblings' father already died when the Japanese warship Maya was sunk in October 1944, wherein 479 were reported killed. Shortly after they start living with their aunt, Seta digs up the supplies he kept before the bombing and gives it to his aunt. While things start out sort of okay between the siblings and their distant relatives, things start taking a turn for the worst as the number of refugees increase in their home and their rations begin to run thin. The first case that shows us that something is going wrong between the relatives is when Seta is convinced by his aunt to sell his mother's kimono. While certainly hesitant to sell something so precious to his family's memory, Seta trades off the kimono for money and supplies that he knows they'll need in the hard times ahead. However, as time goes on, the aunt becomes resentful of the children and, from Seta's perspective, insults them too many times, saying that they are nothing but a burden to her, leading them to leave and strike out on their own. This is a choice which, in retrospect, pretty much dooms the two children. The two do their best to survive, but it soon becomes clear that the times brought about by the Second World War has taken a collective toll on their society. food has become scarce, and anything of value the children can trade proved to be of too little importance to the war-haunted citizens of Japan. The children take shelter in an abandoned bomb shelter which they attempt to light up using fireflies that they manage to capture and bring with them. The next morning, Seda leaves to scrounge up whatever he can find for food or a means to trade for goods and leaves his sister Setsuko behind, alone in the bomb shelter. Setsuko awakens to discover that the fireflies they've collected have died and weeps for them. She then asks the tearful question of why the insects and their mother had to die. Meanwhile, Seda makes his search for anything of value across the war-ravaged landscape of Japan. Unfortunately, he finds very little to make ends meet and resorts to stealing from farmers. He is soon discovered by the said farmers and is beaten for his troubles. Upon his return to the bomb shelter, Seda finds, much to his horror, that his sister Setsuko is very ill. After bringing her to a doctor, the young Seda finds out that his sister is now dying of malnutrition and decides to look for some of the supplies he buried earlier that might still be of use to them. However, before Seda can leave, Setsuko begs him to stay, although the younger boy manages to leave after promising his sister that he will bring her favorite fruit drops once he returns. As he goes out, Seda learns that Japan has finally surrendered to the Americans and decides to ask around about the fate of his father. He gets no comforting answer and accepts with a heavy heart that his father is now very likely dead. That said, he does manage to get a hold of a little bit of food which he brings back to his sister. Unfortunately, by the time he returns, his sister is clearly on the verge of death, and before he can feed her, she dies. Seda then cremates her body along with her doll. Not long after, Seda also dies of starvation, and while people do seem horrified by his corpse, it seems as if it's an all too common sight for them. Not long after, the box containing Setsuko's ashes is found by a janitor, and, upon opening it, releases the spirit of the young girl inside. The spirit of the two siblings reunite, and the final scene shows them watching a rebuilt Kobe in the modern age. Now, a lot of people tend to take the animated film as an anti-war film, but according to Nosaka, the author of the short story, he merely wanted to show the hardship that he and a lot of people experienced during World War II. He wrote the story due to his own grief, and was written more as an autobiography with himself dying by the end. Also of note, though this point is hotly debated by fans, is that from a Japanese perspective, Seda and Setsuko should have stayed with their aunt where it would have been more likely that they'd survive. This is however countered by many American viewers who see the aunt as the one at fault, and that it was only right that the siblings leave her. That said, there is also the counter-argument that the aunt only did what she did because of the scarcity of rations, and that the war and its effects were taking their toll on the woman's mind, leading her to be spiteful and uncooperative. Anyway guys, that's it for this episode of Natural Juan. I certainly hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please feel free to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for notifications. Also, I'd like to make an announcement about my upcoming work, The Misfits, a web novel that takes cues from works like Harry Potter, Full Metal Alchemist, Naruto, and Iron Kingdoms. Think of it as something like what would happen if Hogwarts was a military institute and also taught other forms of magic like the supernatural martial arts practiced by ninjas, dark magic that can call upon the ghosts of the dead, and alchemy that can allow one to control mighty robotic golems or ravenous and deadly chimeras. I've already begun work on the world building and I'm ready to release its first few chapters, but unfortunately, I'm going to need a bit of help from you guys if possible. Please consider supporting my new work, The Misfits, on Patreon, and you'll find my info for it, as well as PayPal and Gcash, in the description below. Natural Juan,